And we're going to hear from Michael Walker, who is the Nature Recovery Manager for Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust, and he's going to give us a talk on traditional woodland management for biodiversity. So off you go.
Thank you. Yes, I've just put together some slides that show the sort of things that the Trust have been doing within woodlands and why we're doing it. And I'm also going to look back, well, you'll see from the first slide, quite a long way. Not this slide, that's the slide that winds on. I'm going back quite a long way and briefly come up to present day, but looking at how managing woodlands by humans has created the habitat that we now manage using traditional woodland management processes. So we'll start our journey 4,000 years ago. I thought that's the to sort of show that instantly takes you back a long way. Sort of 4,000 years to that sort of period. And during that time, people were managing woodland. They were managing woodland because they lived in things like this. This is currently being recreated. It's an experimental archaeology site in Hampshire called Butser Ancient Farm. And this is the Neolithic house that they are building at the moment, based on archaeological evidence. It's yet to have the thatch. I think it has had the thatch on now, but when we were there last summer, it hadn't. But it just shows you the amount of wood that was used, amount of woodland that had to be harvested, of different ages as well. You've got probably 7 to 10 year old sort of poles here that have been split. You've got much younger, perhaps 2, 3 year old hazel or willow to make the roof and the base for the thatch. You've got posts from anything from sort of a baked bean can size right up to an oak posts, perhaps about 10 inches across. So there's a lot of timber product in there, and you can imagine a whole community living in this landscape. They would have needed nearby a source of material, and it was the management that humans started that created what carried on creating the habitats that we heard about in the talk before, because by this point species like auroch were on their way out. Elk didn't get across after the last ice age. They were here before then. So a lot of these giant herbivores that we've been hearing about in the last talk in the main room, a lot of them had gone or become extinct by the time. Certainly by the time the Iron Age were carrying on building their sort of house. That might be Bronze Age, actually. Iron Age, Bronze Age, but after Stonehenge, then the Romans. So again, timber, very important. We were burning it for fuel. We were building our houses with it. We were making all kinds of tools from it. Right through to the medieval, and then the early modern. You see these timber frame buildings with hundreds of oak timbers within a single building. There's a very excellent nature writer who sadly died many years ago. He wrote a book called Waterlog, called Roger Deakin, and he lived in a Elizabethan house that he restored called Walnut Tree Farm, and he estimated, I think it was over 300 oaks would have had to have been felled to create the house that he restored and lived in. So it's a massive amount of product that would have been just to make one of these buildings. So managing woodland is not new. But what we do know is, in the past, and in the recent past, wildlife thrived within it, which is something that we possibly can't say in a lot of our current state of our woodlands. As Adam was saying earlier, biodiversity is going down within woodlands. Most of that is down to lack of management. So a well-coppiced woodland, look at this, we've gone back to Treswell again. So I'm going to use mainly local examples. So back to Treswell, this is the whole flora of wood anemone that you'll find in a coppiced woodland. Wood anemone needs the light, and coppiced woodland lets the light in. The canopy, there's not too many canopy trees in this section. So Treswell is currently managed, a high proportion of it, as a coppice with standards. That's the standard sort of woodland management scheme, where you would probably have a given area, perhaps an acre would be a coppice coop, and within that there will be some tall trees, some tall standards, maiden trees that will be let to grow to a certain height and would then be harvested for timber, perhaps at 70, 80 years. They weren't let to grow to like Sherwood Forest oaks. They were cut at the size they were required. So if you were building a timber frame building and you needed beams that wide, you'll go out and look for a tree that wide. You wouldn't go for a tree and look that wide and chop it down, because the sawmills of the mechanical nature didn't exist. But what coppicing does, it creates this open conditions where flowers like wood anemone can thrive. And that clearly shows that that's been happening in this wood for a long time, because wood anemone is a very, very slow spreader across the ground floor. You're looking back hundreds and hundreds of years there. Clearly shows it's an ancient landscape. So just going back to the more recent past, only 1,000 years ago now, we've gone from 4,000 to 1,000 in 5 minutes. So at the time Domesday Book was produced in 1086, woodland covered about 15% of the land area of England, much the same as it does today. So we seem to think that we've lost all this woodland, but 1,000 years ago we had about the same amount of woodland in England, as calculated by Oliver Rackham, and I'm not going to argue with him when it comes to woodland issues. Nottinghamshire, Rackham calculated, had about 12% woodland cover at the time of Domesday, but we're now down to about 8%. These figures slightly different from the figures that Adam's figures were way up to date, I think, and probably include a lot of planted woodland that the references that I've used haven't. And in Domesday, woodland was recorded as either silver pastilis, which is pasture wood, so wood pasture, a bit like Sherwood Forest, open areas where livestock could graze, the sort of habitat that herbivores would have created. Silver minuta is early expression for coppice woodland, so managed woodland, and then pastilis perloca, which is pasture in places, so a bit of everything, a bit of both. And a lot of woodlands would have been a bit of both. And of the 12% woodland cover that was in Nottinghamshire at the time of Domesday, only about 2% of that 12% was under coppice management, was described as silver minuta. So that doesn't seem a lot to say how important I've just said it is, but it's incredibly time-consuming and high labour intensive to manage woodland in that way. So it would have taken a lot of effort to have managed even 2% of the total area. But it shows it was quite important, because far, far less now. I'm going to do questions later, if that's okay. So as a part of a bit of a personal project away from my role, I've been looking at one Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust woodland, Ploughman Wood, near Loudon. And I've produced these maps based on the map of Sherwood Forest from 1609. Really fortunate that I have a map from very much the age where, to be an ancient woodland, it's got to be in existence in 1600. I've got a map from 1609 of the woodland that I absolutely love, which is this one here. Used to be much bigger though. There's a nature recovery project, if ever I saw one, make that bigger. So I mapped all the woodland. But this weekend I thought I'll have a look what was coppice. And none of it was recorded as silver minuta in Domesday. But the wood names in the 1600s give it away. So all of the ones in the light green have got either coppice or spring in the name. If you see spring, it means it's a coppice wood. And the others are all coppice. So a good proportion there, more than the 2% that would have been at Domesday. But there would have been coppice. There was certainly coppice happening in Ploughman at that time, because the evidence is on the ground. There's some old coppice stools. But just with what was called coppice, there was quite a bit of woodland management happening there. And just to take through the story, so 1609, 1774, we started We lost a lot of woodland during that period. So this is from Chapman's map of Nottinghamshire, which isn't as accurate as the 1609 map, ironically. But you can sort of calculate the rough area of woodland then. And then Sanderson's map, which is really accurate, from 1835. Most of the woodlands disappeared. Ploughman's reduced by that point and split in two. And the modern cover of woodland in these three parishes is pretty much the same now. The bit of lost ploughman is now spread on new plantations, mainly in Lamley. So coppice management is recorded in Ploughman Wood from the 1850s. I've got clear evidence that it was managed as coppice in 1854 because I found a book, an account book in the county archives, handwritten, of all the product that came out of that wood for 5 years. And all the things you would expect. It wasn't just buildings that timber was being used for, and underwood was being used for. The accounts for the Ploughman book, it's mainly all the stuff that we would use, like beam poles, bindings for hedge laying, thatching pegs, hundreds and hundreds of thatching pegs to hold the thatch into roofs. Even lace bobbins, which is a good Nottingham connection. So yeah, lots and lots of product, even coming out by the 1850s. Most of that woodland is now gone, but some of it is preserved in hedgerows. This hedge is particularly species rich. It passes the Hooper rule with knobs on. It's a really, really diverse. Lots of Midland hawthorn in that hedge as well, which is the woodland hawthorn, which is the boundary of one of those woodlands that had gone by the end of the 1700s. So why is coppice management so important? Why is traditional management so important? Just some not keystone species, some real iconic species that we should really still have in Nottinghamshire. The Nightingale. The Nightingale would have thrived in coppice woodland, and in Nottinghamshire it would have done quite well in coppice woodland. But in Nottinghamshire, probably coppice was already on its way out by the time I found that record book. By the mid-1800s, certainly by the late 1800s, coppicing in this part of the world, this part of the country, was already on the decline. We didn't need it for fuel. Coal was more efficient. We didn't need the charcoal to send up to places like Sheffield for the steel, for the steelworks, for the furnaces. It just wasn't economically viable. Oak bark at one time was more valuable than the actual timber itself for tanning, for the tanning industry. To tan leather. So all of these industries were dying out and coppicing died out. But when it was around, nightingales would want to thrive. They love the dense regrowth. They love scrubby, messy, dynamic, whatever words you want. They love that kind of habitat. I'm going to Suffolk in about 4 weeks. And they can be in any old scrappy old hedge, but they're good, decent scrappy old hedges, and there'll be a nightingale singing from it. But the species group that can really show this decline are the butterflies. These are woodland fritillary butterflies. So high brown fritillary, pearl-bordered fritillary, dark green and small pearl-bordered are species that we would have to travel to see now. They barely occur in Nottinghamshire, the odd dark green occasionally. All now extinct, and most of them will have been gone by the early 1900s. By 1920 at the latest, all of those gone. Why? All of them, their food plant is violets. Very common plant. You can see, I walked at lunchtime, found plenty of violets, but they need to be violets growing in just the right conditions. So some of these fritillary species like just lots of bare ground with just groups of violets. Some like the violets to be a little bit more lush growing, perhaps 2 or 3 years on from coppicing. Others like it a little bit more developed, but when it gets completely coppiced over, they leave that area. So that's why coppice woodland was important for species like fritillary, because every year 2 or 3 compartments will have been done for rotation. I'm going to show you a map soon of a rotation map. So there would always been some activity. So it was replicating, again, the large herbivores that we've been talked to about today, you know, going through the area, creating clearings, moving through new areas. We were doing that, but with tools. Silver wash fritillary, they like tall trees but open clearings. So they require something specific for their violet. So they're all very, very picky. So it's no wonder they've died out. Silver wash seems to be making a comeback, and probably a natural comeback rather than a reintroduction. Hope to see some. We'll see some most summers in the dormouse woodlands, the Eton Gamston Retford, Eton Gamston Treswell near Retford. It creates conditions for where some of our most beautiful woodland flowers, you know, early purple orchids, great butterfly orchid. Herb Paris is really frequent throughout Eton and Gamston woods, particularly. Again, it's a woodland indicator. Some parts of the country it's not that at all rare, but in Nottinghamshire it's quite noteworthy. It's not many woodlands that you'll go and you'll see that. Only in the sort of old, formerly managed woodlands, ancient woodlands particularly. Well, it has the most spectacular flower. I think they just look like something out of this world. I think the herb Paris, like little satellites or something. So I'm just going to look at one particular wood and look at some of the work that the Trust have done in there. This is Treswell wood. Treswell wood bought by the Trust, says a newspaper. This was 1972. And very little coppice work had been done in there for many, many, many years. It had been exploited for timber, and in the years that before the Trust acquired it, oak was slowly being stripped out of the wood. So by the time we bought the wood, most of the oak from the top 2/3 had been taken out, which probably opened it up nicely. But it's left us with a very ash-dominant northern part of the wood, which ash, with all the problems that that's got now, has left us with quite an issue, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Oh, those should have gone away. Here we go. So this is a management map to show you the sort of type of rotation that we do and probably would have been done in the past. So the light green areas are all coppice compartments on a 7-year rotation. So that's quite a popular rotation length. That produces the poles that you need for making hurdles. You can split them and weave them between posts to make really nice hurdles that would have been used. Now you see them mainly in decorative features in gardens, but previously they would have been used for sheep management, you know, penning things in. Now we use aluminium ones. So it's a really useful size. The brown and the grey ones are 20-year rotation. So we've got some on 20-year rotation. Producers can produce some posts out of that, or wood for charcoal. Ideally, we probably want a few more short rotation in there, because for species like for birds, most birds, coppice goes through a cycle where for 3 or 4 years, it's after cutting, it's a bit useless for birds. Then it starts to come into its own, and by 10 to 12 years, it's at its optimum for a lot of the breeding birds, and then it drops off. So 20 years, it's already quite a long time after it's dropped off. So probably 15 years might be better, but it's all about having the resource to manage that kind of area. The hatched areas are non-intervention. So we have got some non-intervention or minimal intervention areas. So we have got a watch and see approach on there. And the blue areas are regeneration fells. And I'll talk to you about regeneration fells in a few moments. So coppicing. So this is a coppice worker nearly completing a compartment. Looks a bit messy. Some people think, what's going on in the wood? But people up at Treswell have got used to it now. They know that this is going to happen every year, and they'll see the benefits of it, because the following year after coppice is when you get that really nice flush of woodland flowers and all the insects and the pollinators and the wildlife using that habitat that's been created. Compartments are always not next to each other. So one that was cut last year won't have one cut next to it the year before. So you've got this mixture throughout the wood. And that's the following summer. So hazel, if it's unmolested by deer, can put on about 6 foot in a year quite easily in good growing conditions. And last year was good growing conditions because it was quite wet in the spring, so the ground was wet. It was up this way. 10-minute warning, thank you. So deer is a major problem, and we heard earlier how the problem, the high numbers. We've got more deer than we've ever had before. The Trust have experimented with a cheaper type of fence. Deer fencing is not cheap, particularly for a charity to buy. But the rangers in the team that look after this wood came up with a really ingenious way. It's quite cheap plastic netting, about 6 foot high, and instead of putting a post every 2-3 metres, we put a post every 10 metres, proper fence post, and then used hazel from the coppice to make the intermediates. And it's worked really, really well. As you can see here, the one just now my clipboard is just outside the fence, gnawed to pieces, and that is still that height. The other inside, this is still year one, where the fence was in. A little bit later in the year, it was already up to the top of my head just about. So that's been really successful. That fencing has just come down now and has been put round a new compartment, so you can take it down and reuse it. So you see they're perfectly growing dense stalls. If deer had got hold of that, there would have been far fewer stems, and more importantly, they wouldn't have been very straight. And to keep commercial coppicers interested, they've got to be straight poles, and there's got to be a lot of them, because it's got to be worth their while to come and chop this product. Otherwise, it's left for the ranger team with volunteers to do it. There's only so much they can do. We can do far more if we're producing good quality coppice and there's somebody interested in wanting to cut it for us at no cost to us, and occasionally at an income for us once it gets good enough. So there's some of the poles stacked up ready to be used. So quick look at rides. Rides are really important, especially ones that are open to the light. This was in Ploughman Wood. This was during COVID, and the team were too busy at Attenborough. This is the southern team. All the issues with far more people wanting their outdoor space. So this ride didn't get cut that year, and it was fabulous. It was really alive. But a woodland ride is far better if it doesn't go path and then tall trees. You want to go in stages. Even this is too narrow at the moment. To open them up so that it gets plenty of light, and then you get these stages. It's always the edge of woodlands that are more beneficial for biodiversity because of the knotty sort of tangle of bramble and things, lots of things for nesting in. So the more edge, and the ride is just another edge, the more edge you can create, the better. So that's the same ride with coppice either side. And the same ride again. You can see on one side you've got a lot of bramble. This used to be on a biannual rotation, so 1 year one side would get cut next to the path, the following year the other side would get cut. So you've always got this range of different turf structures. You find things like this if you're in the right wood. That's the dormouse nest. So it's that sort of habitat where we find the wild nests. And if you can't see the dormouse, there he is there. They love that kind of thing, but so the bird's nest. With the amount of wren's nests we locate, thinking it's a dormouse nest. Oh, it's a wren. But the wrens are great, but dormice are what we're looking for. Ash dieback. That's presented us with quite a problem, but also quite an opportunity. We're not clearing ash out of our woodlands if they've got the disease, provided they're going to fall down within a compartment. We just want them to stay there because there could be some resistant ones. You don't want to be chopping down ash that might be resistant. But where they're by well-used paths, we will clear back within a felling, within 20, 30 metres, to make sure that if they do fall, they're not going to fall across a path. But that's given us the opportunity to create these wide rides, and we have been doing some supplementary planting on these edges to introduce some species that should be there that aren't, but woodland appropriate species, and perhaps some more hazel to create, so we can create those stepped edges to the ride before you get to the canopy tree cover. This doesn't look like the greatest bit of habitat. This is a woodland at the edge of one of the dormouse woodlands, with a privately owned woodland that we do have dormouse boxes in. And the dormouse group this winter took it on themselves, with the owner's permission of course, to make it better for wildlife, but particularly for dormice. This was very, very dark, this narrow corridor. Never been any management. It's a 30-year-old wood, just planted, very densely planted. And we've started to chop back one edge to open it up to light and to create a real scrubby edge. First year we put dormouse boxes in here, lots and lots of dormice. Since then, and the following year it was good, but since then it's been dropping down. And there's not as much food in there because it's got a little bit shaded out. There's not as much fruit being produced in there. There's not as much nesting habitat. So we've opened up this ride, just doing one work party a month over the winter. And we've done some supplementary planting as well. So looks optimistic on that one. And quickly, regeneration. I love this picture because it's just chaos. This was an area which was thinned in ploughman, and I think it was a little bit over-thinned. So it was a bigger hole in the canopy created, but it's created this absolutely wonderful area. You can't get in it anymore, which is great, but it's full of birdsong. If you want to go and listen to birdsong or watch bats fly, which I like doing, around this glade, it's just full. If you want to hear the birds, that's where you go in the wood, because it's got so much habitat for all sorts of different species. So if you're involved in any kind of management in a woodland, it's all about creating a bit of chaos. A bit of organisation, but a bit of chaos as well, where you've got an opportunity because a tree's fallen down dead, as happens, you've created a hole in the canopy. Perhaps consider some supplementary planting of some hazel or something like that to fill that gap. This is all naturally regenerated. There's no planting done in there at all. The deer even can't get in there. And this is a regeneration compartment that we got a bit of a stick about until people realised what we were doing it for. Again, a lot of ash had to come out, but it was by the most busiest path in the wood. Lots of dog walkers and what have you. Within year one, it had started to recover on its own. We did quite a bit of supplementary planting. People tend to be quite happy about woodland management, provided you do a bit of planting.
Something must be done.
Something must be done. Bluebells, I did a survey of the flowers the year before. Hardly any bluebells, lots of leaves. This year, following year, they flowered. Which, as they should do, following the coppiced cycle. Yeah, a bit more growth. So yeah, it just creates chaos. I love a bit of chaos in the woodland. So we've got time for some questions, if anyone's got any questions.